in the dying heat of a desert afternoon, a stranger rode into town and, within hours, he began speaking secrets no living man should have known. Dust rolled slowly across the empty street. Like a tired ghost drifting through the bones of the town, the wooden buildings leaned toward each other as if sharing rumors. Windows were half closed against the sun, and the air carried the stale smell of whiskey, leather, and secrets that had been buried too long. The town of Black Hollow wasn't marked on most maps anymore. Travelers passed through once in a while, traders, drifters, gamblers, chasing luck, but nobody stayed longer than they had to. Something about the place felt wrong. Not dangerous in the usual frontier way, just heavy. Like every plank of wood and every grain of dust was holding on to something it didn't want remembered. Late that afternoon, a lone rider appeared on the ridge beyond town. He didn't hurry. His horse walked slowly down the hill, hooves pressing softly into the dry earth. The man in the saddle wore a dark coat that had seen too many winters, and a hat pulled low enough to hide most of his face. A revolver rested at his hip, but his hand stayed loose, calm. Like a man who didn't expect trouble, or maybe a man who wasn't afraid of it. The few townsfolk still out in the heat noticed him immediately. Old Carter stopped hammering nails outside the general store. A woman, carrying a bucket, froze halfway across the street. Inside the saloon, the piano player missed 2 notes when he saw the rider through the swinging doors. Strangers came through. Black Hollow sometimes, but this one felt different. The rider entered town without announcing himself, without asking directions, without even glancing around like a traveler trying to learn the place. Instead, he looked straight ahead, like a man returning somewhere he already knew. He tied his horse to the rail outside the saloon. For a moment he stood there, silent, studying the street. Then he spoke, not loudly, not angrily, just clearly enough for the nearest man to hear. "Sheriff Dalton still drinks alone after midnight, doesn't he?" The man beside the saloon door stiffened, because the stranger hadn't asked a question. He'd stated a fact, and in a town like Black Hollow, that meant only one thing. This man knew something he shouldn't, or worse, he knew everything. Asterisk. The man who first heard the stranger speak was named Tom Weaver, the town's stable keeper. He had spent nearly 20 years in Black Hollow, long enough to recognize trouble when it stepped off a horse. And the way the stranger said Sheriff Dalton's name made Tom's stomach tighten. Tom tried to laugh it off. "Sheriff drinks plenty," he muttered, scratching his beard. "Ain't much of a secret in this town." The stranger turned slightly, just enough for the fading sunlight to catch part of his face. His expression was calm. "Too calm. I didn't say he drinks," the stranger replied quietly. "I said he drinks alone after midnight. In his office, same bottle he hides under the floorboard." Tom stopped breathing for a moment, because that detail wasn't common talk. Not even close. Sheriff Dalton had hidden that bottle for years. Only 2 people in town had ever seen it: Tom Weaver and the sheriff himself. The stranger stepped past him and pushed open the saloon doors. Inside, the room smelled of sweat, whiskey, and quiet tension. A handful of men sat around scattered tables. The piano player resumed his tune, though slower, now uncertain. Every pair of eyes followed the newcomer. The stranger walked to the bar and placed a single coin on the counter. Whiskey. The bartender, a broad-shouldered man named Cal Brooks, poured a glass without speaking. His eyes studied the stranger carefully. Drifters weren't unusual, but drifters usually looked tired, desperate, or dangerous. This man looked like none of those things. He looked like a man who had already made peace with whatever was coming. Cal slid the whiskey across the counter. "You passing through?" he asked. The stranger took a slow sip before answering. "No." The word settled into the room, like a stone dropped into still water, at a table near the window. Two ranch hands exchanged quiet glances. Nobody stayed in Black Hollow unless they had a reason. The stranger turned his head slightly, scanning the room. Then he spoke again. "You still owe Mason Hill $40, don't you?" he said casually. One of the ranch hands froze. His chair scraped the floor as he stood. "Up halfway. How the hell would you know that?" The stranger didn't even look at him. Instead, he continued calmly. "And you," he said, nodding toward the piano player, "left Amarillo after that poker game went bad. A man named Fletcher, still looking for you." The piano stopped, dead silent. Now the entire room was staring. No one laughed, because these weren't rumors. They were private things, quiet things, the kind of mistakes men buried deep and never spoke about again. The stranger finished his whiskey and set the glass down. "You folks have a lot of secrets in this town," he said softly. The bartender leaned forward, voice low. "Who are you?" For the first time, the stranger lifted his eyes fully, cold, steady, patient. "Double. Patient Double, quotes a man who listens," he said. Then he added something that sent a chill through the room, "and a man who remembers." Outside, the evening wind carried dust across the empty street. Inside the saloon, every man suddenly felt like the stranger had walked in carrying a mirror. One that showed things they had spent years trying to forget, and none of them knew the most dangerous part yet. The stranger hadn't even started telling the real secrets. Asterisk word travels fast in small towns. In Black Hollow, it moved like wildfire, through dry grass. By the time the sun disappeared behind the desert hills, nearly everyone had heard about the stranger in the saloon. The man who knew things he shouldn't. Some called it luck, others called it gossip. But the people who heard the details knew better. These weren't rumors whispered in alleyways. These were secrets, buried deep things. Only a few people had ever known, and somehow the stranger was digging them up, one by one, inside the saloon. The atmosphere had changed. No one spoke freely anymore. Every sentence was shorter. Every laugh sounded forced. Men who had once sat comfortably with their backs turned now, kept glancing over their shoulders, because the stranger hadn't left. He remained at the bar, nursing his whiskey slowly, watching the room like a patient observer. And occasionally he spoke, a rancher who had cheated his own brother out of land, a merchant who had watered down his medicine during the winter sickness, a gambler who had once slipped a knife into a man's ribs behind the stable and claimed it was self-defense. Each secret landed quietly. No shouting, no accusations. Just calm statements delivered in that same steady voice. But the effect was the same as pulling the floor out from under the room. Fear began spreading through Black Hollow. Because if the stranger knew these things, what else did he know outside? Lanterns flickered to life along the dusty street. People stood in small groups, whispering. Some wanted the sheriff involved. Others wanted the stranger gone before sunrise. But one man listened to the rumors more carefully than the rest. Sheriff Elias Dalton. Dalton sat alone inside his small office at the edge of town. The same office where he spent most nights, staring at paperwork he barely read. When the first report came in, he ignored it. When the second came, he frowned. By the third, the bottle came from beneath the loose floorboard, beside his desk, exactly where the stranger had said it would be. Dalton stared at the glass in his hand. There were things about Black Hollow that outsiders didn't know. Things that had happened years ago. Things the town had agreed collectively to forget. But the stranger's arrival felt like a stone. Thrown into still water, old memories were beginning to rise, and Dalton didn't like the direction those memories were heading. Finally, he stood up, strapped on his gun belt, then stepped outside. The night air was cooler now, but the town felt restless. Lantern light spilled from the saloon. Windows. Dalton walked slowly down the street. By the time he pushed open the swinging doors, the entire room fell silent. Every man looked toward him, and then toward the stranger. The stranger turned slightly. On his bar stool. For a moment, two men simply studied each other. Sheriff Dalton spoke first. "You've been talking a lot tonight." The stranger nodded once. "People here have interesting histories." Dalton's voice hardened. "Maybe you should keep your curiosity to yourself." The stranger lifted his glass calmly. Then he said something that made the sheriff's face drain of color. "Tell me something, Dalton." A small pause. "How's that mine outside town doing?" Since the night 3 men disappeared there, the room froze. Because that wasn't just a secret. That was something the town had buried. A long time ago, something no stranger should have known. And suddenly, everyone in Black Hollow realized one thing. The stranger wasn't just stirring trouble, he was digging up the past. The saloon had never been that quiet. Even the lantern flame seemed to hold still. Sheriff Elias Dalton stared at the stranger, his jaw tightening as the words hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. The mine. Nobody in Black Hollow talked about the mine anymore. Years ago, it had been the town's hope silver, veins buried deep beneath the desert rock. Men poured into the valley, chasing fortunes that never quite came. Then one night, 3 miners disappeared. No bodies, no witnesses. Just empty beds and tools left behind in the tunnels. The town called it an accident. Was something only a few men knew. Dalton's hand drifted closer to the revolver on his hip. "You should be careful what stories you repeat," he said softly. Then he lifted his eyes toward the sheriff. "No, Sheriff. Stories change every time they're told." He leaned slightly forward on the bar. "But facts." A small pause. "Facts stay the same." This stranger set the glass down. The quiet clink echoed across the room. "You remember that night," he continued calmly. "You remember the lantern falling in the tunnel, the shouting, the gunshot." Someone in the back of the room shifted, uneasily, because the stranger wasn't guessing. Any more he was describing it. Dalton's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You better stop talking." But the stranger didn't. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward the men sitting at the corner table. 3 of them, men who had lived in Black Hollow for years, men who suddenly looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them. "You 3 were there too?" the stranger said quietly. One of them stood up. "How do you know that?" The stranger studied their faces like a man recognizing old photographs. Then he delivered the words that changed everything. "Because the 3 men who disappeared that night," he paused, "didn't vanish in a cave-in." The room felt colder. The stranger's voice dropped even lower. "They were murdered." And now everyone in the saloon understood. Something terrifying. The stranger wasn't revealing secrets for amusement. He was uncovering something the entire town had worked for years to hide. The word "murdered" lingered in the air like the echo of a gunshot. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room erupted into whispers. Men leaned toward each other, voices low but urgent. A lie. Sheriff Dalton's face had gone pale beneath the brim of his hat. His hand still hovered near his revolver. "Dalton said." The stranger shook his head slowly. "No, Sheriff. I'm finishing one. The word spread through the room like cold wind at the corner table. One of them, Harlan Pike, a thick-necked ranch. Foreman stood up abruptly. That's 5, Pike growled. The stranger interrupted quietly. Pike stopped. The stranger's eyes didn't leave him. I'm reminding you. That sentence hit harder than any threat, because memories were harder to fight than the truth about the mine had stayed buried because everyone who knew it had agreed without ever saying the words that it was better left alone. 3 men had died, but the town had survived. Silver money had kept businesses alive. Land deals had been signed. Lives had moved forward, dragging the past back into the open wood. Even more unsettling,